When did your teacher go too far to prove a point? My classmate Asher insisted that blood was blue until it hit oxygen, while Mr. Nguyen kept explaining deoxygenated blood only looked blue through your skin. It's basic science, Asher. Blood is never blue. It's either bright red or dark red depending on oxygen levels. Asher shook his head stubbornly. He'd seen diagrams in textbooks showing blue veins and red arteries and refused to believe it was just for illustration. Half the class sided with Asher because they'd grown up thinking the same thing. The other half was just entertained by how frustrated Mr. Nguyen was getting. On Thursday, Mr. Nguyen walked into class with a determined look on his face. He set his coffee mug down harder than usual and announced he was done arguing about easily provable facts. Asher smirked, thinking he'd won, but then Mr. Nguyen went into the supply closet and came back carrying medical equipment. He had a vacuum chamber, sterile needles, and tubes like you'd see at a blood donation center. The whole class went silent as he set everything up on the demonstration table. Jane raised her hand to ask what he was doing, but he waved her off, saying we'd understand in a minute. Then he pulled out a medical blood bag from a cooler we hadn't noticed before. The bag was full of dark red blood with a label that had been partially scratched off. A few students gasped, and Jessica actually got up to move to the back of the room. Nobody had expected him to bring actual human blood to class. "This is deoxygenated blood," Mr. Nguyen announced. "As you can see, it's dark red. Not blue, never blue." He connected the bag to the vacuum chamber to demonstrate how blood looked without any air exposure. Even in the vacuum, it stayed dark red. Asher crossed his arms and muttered something about it not being fresh enough. That seemed to push Mr. Nguyen over the edge because his face turned red, and he slammed his hand on the table. "You want fresh blood? Fine, I'll show you fresh blood." He grabbed a syringe and started rolling up his sleeve. The whole class erupted with students telling him to stop. Michelle ran out of the room saying she was getting the principal, but Mr. Nguyen was already tying rubber tubing around his upper arm like he was about to draw his own blood. Ryan stood up and physically grabbed Mr. Nguyen's arm to stop him. That seemed to snap our teacher back to reality because he looked around at our terrified faces and slowly put the syringe down. He mumbled an apology and said we should take a 5-minute break while he cleaned up the demonstration materials. But while he was packing things away, Megan noticed something disturbing. The blood bag had a partial label visible under where it had been scratched. She could make out part of a date from 2 days ago and what looked like the beginning of a name. Her face went pale as she whispered to the people around her, "This is fresh human blood." Where did he get fresh human blood? The question spread through the classroom like wildfire. Everyone was staring at the bag trying to see the label better. Mr. Nguyen noticed our stares and quickly shoved the bag back in the cooler, but it was too late. We'd all seen enough to know this wasn't some old teaching supply. Jane asked directly where the blood came from. Mr. Nguyen said it was from a medical supplier, but his voice cracked when he said it. Tom pointed out that medical suppliers don't give scratched-off bags to teachers. The room was getting tense as everyone realized something was seriously wrong. "I have connections at the hospital," Mr. Nguyen finally said. "They gave me expired blood that would have been destroyed anyway." But expired blood wouldn't have yesterday's date on it. And hospitals don't just hand out blood bags to teachers even if they're expired. The more he tried to explain, the more suspicious everyone became. Mike pulled out his phone to call his mom, who was a nurse, to ask if that was even legal. Principal Johnson arrived with Michelle just as the situation was spiraling. She took one look at the blood bag on the table and told everyone to leave the classroom immediately. As we filed out, I heard her asking Mr. Nguyen where he got human blood and why he thought bringing it to school was appropriate. We spent the rest of the period in the library while administrators dealt with Mr. Nguyen. Rumors flew about where he might have gotten the blood. After school, I overheard 2 teachers talking in hushed voices. They mentioned that Mr. Nguyen had been going through a rough divorce and acting erratically for weeks. His ex-wife had recently started dating someone new, and he'd been taking it badly. One teacher mentioned he'd been spending time at the hospital visiting someone. The next day, we had a substitute teacher. Principal Johnson came in to tell us Mr. Nguyen was taking a leave of absence. She assured us the blood had been properly sourced and disposed of, but wouldn't give details. We weren't allowed to discuss the incident, and anyone who'd taken photos was required to delete them. But Megan had done research overnight. She showed me a news article on her phone about a man who'd been attacked 2 nights ago and had to receive emergency blood transfusions. The victim's name was partially visible in the article photo. It matched the scratched-off label from the blood bag. My hands started shaking as I looked at the name on Megan's phone screen. The article showed a photo of Samir Huang lying in a hospital bed with tubes everywhere. The same name we'd seen on that blood bag before Mr. Nguyen scratched it off. I grabbed Megan's arm and pulled her away from the other students who were still talking about yesterday. We needed to figure out what this meant without anyone else hearing us. The blood Mr. Nguyen brought to class wasn't just some random medical supply. It came from someone who'd been attacked and needed it to survive. My stomach felt sick thinking about how Mr. Nguyen might have taken blood from a dying man. Megan kept scrolling through the article while I watched the hallway for teachers. The attack happened 2 nights before Mr. Nguyen's demonstration, right around the time he'd been at the hospital. The victim lost so much blood they needed multiple transfusions to stay alive. Megan whispered that we couldn't just ignore this, but we also couldn't go around accusing a teacher. Even if he was on leave now, this was serious stuff that could get us in major trouble. I nodded and we agreed to be careful about our next move. After school, I walked past the teacher's lounge on my way to my locker. Two teachers were standing in the doorway talking about Mr. Nguyen. They didn't notice me slowing down to tie my shoe right outside. One teacher said Mr. Nguyen had been visiting the hospital every single day for weeks. She'd seen him there when she took her daughter to the emergency room. The other teacher mentioned his behavior had gotten really weird since his wife left him. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. His ex-wife was dating someone named Samir. I stood up so fast I almost dropped my backpack. Could the attack victim be the same Samir that Mr. Nguyen's ex was dating? I practically ran to find Megan, who was waiting by the bike racks. I told her what I'd heard and watched her face go pale. She said she'd check social media to find out if it was the same person. We both knew this was getting way more complicated than we'd thought. That evening at dinner, my mom asked why I wasn't eating much. My dad noticed I kept checking my phone under the table. They wanted to know what was going on at the school that had me so distracted. I remembered Principal Johnson's warning about not discussing what happened in class. So I just said we had a weird day with a substitute teacher. My parents exchanged looks but didn't push for more information. After dinner, I went to my room and waited for Megan to call. Around 9:30, my phone finally rang. Megan's voice was shaky when she told me what she'd found. She'd gone through Mr. Nguyen's ex-wife's social media accounts for the past few months. There were dozens of photos of her with Samir Huang starting about 2 months ago. They looked happy together at restaurants and parks and concerts. But the comments section told a different story. Mr. Nguyen had left angry messages on almost every photo before his account got blocked. He called Samir names and said his wife would regret leaving him. Some of the comments were so mean that other people told him to get help. Megan had taken screenshots of everything before the post could get deleted. The next morning, I got to the school early, and Ryan was already waiting by my locker. He looked like he hadn't slept much and kept rubbing his hands together. He said he felt terrible about grabbing Mr. Nguyen's arm in class. He kept wondering if he'd overreacted or made things worse somehow. I told him he did the right thing by stopping Mr. Nguyen from drawing his own blood. Who knows what would have happened if Ryan hadn't stepped in. Ryan seemed relieved, but still looked worried about the whole situation. Between second and third period, I heard Asher's loud voice in the hallway. He was telling a group of freshmen about what he called the blood bag incident. He kept laughing about how Mr. Nguyen went crazy over a stupid argument about blood color. A bunch of our classmates told him to shut up. Jane walked right up to him and said it wasn't funny when someone might have died. She reminded him that blood was meant to save someone's life, not prove a point. Asher's smile disappeared and he mumbled something before walking away. At lunch, Mike came running over to our table with his phone out. His mom had just texted him from the hospital where she worked as a nurse. The hospital discovered they were missing a whole unit of blood from their emergency supplies. They'd started an investigation but didn't have many details yet. Mike's mom wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but she wanted Mike to know something serious was happening. We all stared at each other, knowing this confirmed our worst fears. Tom leaned in and said we should go to the police with everything we knew. Michelle immediately shook her head and reminded us about Principal Johnson's warning. She was scared we'd get suspended or expelled for investigating when we were told not to. The whole lunch table started arguing in whispers about what we should do. Teachers kept walking by our table, and we'd stop talking until they passed. Everyone had different opinions about whether to speak up or stay quiet. The weight of what we knew felt heavier with each passing minute. Caroline Perry started pulling kids out of our next class one by one for what she called wellness checks. She had this fake worried look on her face when she came to get me during math class. Her office smelled like vanilla candles and she had those motivational posters all over the walls. She asked me to sit down and started with questions about how I was sleeping and eating since the incident. I told her I was fine, but she kept pushing with more questions. She wanted to know exactly what I saw in the classroom and who I'd talked to about it. Her pen moved faster across her notepad when I mentioned the scratched label on the blood bag. She asked if I'd taken any photos or if anyone else had. When I said no, she seemed disappointed and wrote something down. She kept circling back to what Megan and I had discussed after school. I stuck to basic answers, but could tell she was fishing for something specific. After 20 minutes, she finally let me go, but reminded me that spreading rumors could hurt people. Back in class, Mike looked stressed from his meeting with her and whispered that she'd asked him about his mom at the hospital. That night, I opened my laptop and started a Google Doc to track everything that was happening. I typed out dates and times and what everyone had said about the blood bag. I included the news article about Samir Huang and the timeline of when he was attacked. I wrote down what the teachers had said about Mr. Nguyen's divorce and his behavior changes. I saved screenshots of everything I could find online, including the social media posts Megan had shown me. The document grew to 5 pages, as I remembered more details from the past few days. I password protected it and made a backup copy on a flash drive just in case. The next morning, there was a man in a suit standing outside the main office talking to Principal Johnson. He had a badge clipped to his belt and a notebook in his hand. Word spread fast that a real detective was at the school to investigate what happened. Eli Barrett introduced himself to our homeroom and said he needed to speak with everyone who was in Mr. Nguyen's class that day. He set up in the conference room and started calling students in alphabetical order. Kids came back from their interviews looking nervous and wouldn't say much about what he asked. When my turn came, Detective Barrett shook my hand and asked me to walk him through everything I remembered. He had a recorder on the table and took notes while I talked about the blood demonstration. He asked specific questions about the label on the bag and whether I could read any of the information on it. I told him about the date being from 2 days before, and that part of a name was visible. He wanted to know if Mr. Nguyen had said anything about where the blood came from. I repeated what our teacher had said about hospital connections and expired blood. Detective Barrett nodded and wrote everything down without showing any reaction on his face. He asked if I knew anything else about the blood's origin, but I decided not to mention our theories about Samir. When he finished with me, I went back to class and my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. She was waiting for her interview and seemed nervous about what to say. After her meeting, she texted me that she'd told him about the news article she found. She figured he would discover it anyway during his investigation and thought being honest was smarter. She said Detective Barrett had asked her a lot of follow-up questions about how she found the article. Later that afternoon, Principal Johnson's voice came over the intercom calling everyone to an emergency assembly. We all filed into the auditorium where she stood at the podium looking serious. She announced that Mr. Nguyen would not be returning to teach for the rest of the school year. She talked about how the school takes student safety as their top priority. She said the administration was cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation, but couldn't share specific details. Parents had been notified and counseling services were available for anyone who needed support. She reminded us not to spread rumors or post about the situation on social media. The whole speech felt rehearsed and she didn't take any questions before dismissing us. As we left the auditorium, I saw Theodore Altman from the school board in the main office with Principal Johnson. His face was red and he was waving his hands while he talked. I heard him say something about liability before Principal Johnson closed her office door. He mentioned that there should have been warning signs about Mr. Nguyen's mental state. Other teachers walking by looked uncomfortable and hurried past the office. The next day, we had the substitute teacher again for science class, and she looked like she didn't want to be there. She kept the lesson super basic and just had us read from the textbook. When someone asked about the blood unit we were supposed to study, she quickly changed the subject to plants. She avoided the demonstration table completely and wouldn't even look at the supply closet. 2 days later, the school secretary came to our English class with a message. She said representatives from the hospital wanted to meet with students who witnessed the incident. Kathy Duran had contacted the school requesting to speak with us about the missing blood. Principal Johnson had refused at first, but apparently Detective Barrett told her the hospital had a right to investigate too. They scheduled meetings for that afternoon in the library with groups of 5 students at a time. When my group met with Kathy Duran, she had a laptop and a folder of papers with her. She explained that the hospital had discovered a unit of blood missing from their emergency supplies. The blood type matched exactly what was needed for Samir Huang's transfusion after his attack. She opened her laptop and showed us security footage from the hospital's blood storage area. The video showed someone in scrubs and a surgical mask entering the restricted area late at night. The person knew exactly where to go and which refrigerator to open. They took one bag and left within 3 minutes like they'd planned it perfectly. Even though the mask covered most of their face, the person's height and walk looked familiar to those of us who knew Mr. Nguyen. The timestamp at the bottom of the screen showed 11:47 p.m. on Wednesday night, just hours before Mr. Nguyen brought that blood bag to our Thursday morning class. Kathy clicked through more footage showing the same person leaving through a side door 3 minutes later, carrying something in a small cooler. She zoomed in on the person's hands and we could see the same watch Mr. Nguyen always wore with the broken leather strap he kept saying he'd replace. Mike got a text during lunch that made his face go white, and he showed it to me with shaking hands. His mom had just been fired from the hospital for discussing the missing blood with him, even though she'd only confirmed what we already suspected. He slammed his tray down and stormed out of the cafeteria, while the rest of us sat there not knowing what to say. By the time school ended, Mike's mom was already cleaning out her locker at the hospital, and Mike was punching his fist into his palm, saying she was just trying to do the right thing. The next morning, the parking lot was packed with angry parents demanding to know why their kids had been exposed to stolen human blood in a classroom. Some were yelling at the security guard that they were pulling their kids out immediately if Principal Johnson didn't come outside and explain what happened. More cars kept arriving and parents were gathering in groups sharing what their kids had told them about the incident. Leilani Cardenas showed up with a camera crew and started sticking a microphone in parents' faces, asking them how they felt about the school's handling of the situation. Principal Johnson came outside and told Leilani she was on the school property without permission and needed to leave immediately. When Leilani kept filming and asking questions, Principal Johnson called the police to have her removed, which just made the parents angrier, because now it looked like the school was hiding something. 2 officers showed up and escorted Leilani to the sidewalk, but she kept filming from there, and more parents went over to talk to her. Detective Barrett arrived the next day with official paperwork, and we watched from the library windows as he and 2 other officers went into Mr. Nguyen's classroom with boxes. They spent 3 hours in there taking photos and bagging up everything from his desk drawers to the posters on his walls. They carried out the vacuum chamber he'd used for the blood demonstration and sealed it in an evidence bag along with stacks of papers and what looked like more medical supplies from the closet. Tom's dad showed up at the school that afternoon and gathered a bunch of us in an empty classroom to explain that we had legal rights as witnesses. He said the school couldn't stop us from making official statements to the police about what we saw and offered to represent any of us for free if we wanted to come forward. He handed out his business cards and told us to think about it and talk to our parents, but emphasized that what we witnessed was evidence in a criminal investigation. That evening, Jaden Choi appeared on the local news standing outside a medical facility, saying his client, Mr. Nguyen, was receiving treatment for a mental health crisis. He read from a prepared statement saying Mr. Nguyen's actions were the result of a psychological breakdown following his divorce, and that he never intended to harm anyone. He said Mr. Nguyen was cooperating with authorities and taking responsibility for his mistakes while getting the help he needed. The reporter asked if Mr. Nguyen had stolen the blood, but Jaden just repeated that his client was focused on recovery. 2 days later, Samir Huang walked out of the hospital using a cane with reporters waiting for him. He looked thin and tired, but managed to smile as he thanked the doctors and nurses who saved his life. When asked about the attack, he said he was just grateful to be alive and wanted to thank all the blood donors whose donations helped save him. He didn't mention Mr. Nguyen's name, but everyone watching knew what he meant when he emphasized how important legitimate blood donations are for saving lives. The school board called an emergency meeting that Thursday night, and the auditorium was packed with parents demanding answers. Theodore Altman stood at the podium sweating as parents shouted questions about how a teacher could bring human blood into a classroom without anyone knowing. He kept saying they were reviewing all safety protocols and would make sure nothing like this ever happened again, but parents weren't satisfied with vague promises. One mom in the back stood up waving printed papers and announced she'd found posts Mr. Nguyen had made on a teaching forum months ago. She read out loud how he'd written about being frustrated with students who wouldn't accept facts and wanting to teach them real lessons they'd never forget. The room erupted with parents yelling that these were warning signs that should have been reported and demanding to know why no one had acted on them. Theodore's face turned red as he admitted the posts had been brought to the administration's attention, but they'd been dismissed as just a teacher venting frustration. The whole auditorium exploded with parents shouting and pointing fingers at Theodore while he kept trying to calm everyone down, but nobody was listening anymore. Caroline Perry from the counseling office stood up and announced she'd be organizing group sessions for our class starting Monday to help us process what happened. She passed around sign-up sheets while parents were still yelling at the board members about accountability and safety failures. The meeting went on for another hour with parents demanding investigations and threatening lawsuits, until finally the board members just walked out saying they'd schedule another meeting once they had more information. Over the weekend, Megan texted me nonstop with stuff she was finding online about Mr. Nguyen and the hospital. She discovered through old volunteer newsletters that Mr. Nguyen had been volunteering at the same hospital for 8 years, doing everything from reading to patients to helping with blood drives. The volunteer coordinator's name was listed in one newsletter, and Megan found her on social media, where she'd posted that the entire volunteer program was suspended immediately pending a complete security review. Monday morning, Caroline Perry pulled groups of us out of first period for her counseling sessions in the conference room. She had us sit in a circle and kept asking how we were feeling, but then whenever someone started talking about what actually happened, she'd interrupt and say we needed to focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past. Tom got frustrated and said we couldn't move forward without understanding what happened, but Caroline just smiled and said, that was for the authorities to figure out, not us. The sessions felt more like she was trying to control what we said than actually help us deal with what we saw. After lunch, Detective Barrett showed up at the school again and asked to speak with our whole class together. He told us Mr. Nguyen had been officially charged with theft of medical supplies and reckless endangerment based on the evidence and our testimonies. He thanked us for being honest about what we witnessed and said, without our statements, they wouldn't have been able to build such a strong case. Jane asked what would happen to him now, and Detective Barrett said that would be up to the courts. But Mr. Nguyen was facing serious charges. That afternoon, the local news website posted a breaking story that Samir Huang was suing both the hospital and the school district for negligence. His lawyer was quoted saying proper oversight at either institution could have prevented the theft and the dangerous classroom incident that followed. The article included a photo of Samir still using a cane outside the courthouse, with his lawyer explaining how the missing blood could have cost his client his life. By Tuesday morning, someone had started an online petition demanding Principal Johnson resign for trying to cover up the incident and telling us not to talk about it. The petition spread through group chats and social media faster than the administration could control it. By lunch, it had over 200 signatures, and by the end of school on Wednesday, it was over 500 with comments from students and parents about other times the principal had swept problems under the rug. Thursday morning, we were all in science class with the substitute teacher when the door opened and a woman walked in looking nervous. The substitute introduced her as Mr. Nguyen's ex-wife who wanted to speak to us. She stood at the front of the room with tears in her eyes, apologizing for what her ex-husband had done. She said she had no idea how badly the divorce had affected him and wished she'd seen the warning signs of his breakdown. She explained that he'd always been passionate about teaching, but somewhere along the way that passion turned into something dangerous. Most of us just sat there not knowing what to say while she talked about how guilty she felt. Ryan suddenly stood up and ran out of the room with his hands shaking, and the substitute teacher followed him. We found out later he'd been having panic attacks every time he came to science class, even with the substitute teacher. The smell of the room and sitting at the same desks where everything happened kept triggering flashbacks of grabbing Mr. Nguyen's arm. His parents came to pick him up that day, and we didn't see him again for the rest of the week. Mike told us at lunch that Ryan's parents decided to switch him to online school for the rest of the semester because he couldn't handle being in the classroom anymore. Friday afternoon, Kathy Duran from the hospital was interviewed on the news about their new security measures. She stood in front of the hospital explaining that they were installing biometric locks on all blood storage areas and requiring two-person verification for any blood product removal. She said she was personally leading the implementation team to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. The reporter asked if these measures were admission that their previous security was inadequate, but Kathy just said they were always looking for ways to improve patient safety. That weekend, Mike's family started a GoFundMe to help with expenses while his mom looked for a new job after being fired from the hospital. The description explained how she'd been terminated for speaking up about the missing blood, and now they were struggling to pay bills. Within 2 days, the community had donated over $15,000, and by the end of the week it was over $30,000, with comments from people saying they supported whistleblowers who did the right thing. Monday morning, Detective Barrett asked to speak with me, Megan, Tom, and Jane privately after school. He told us Mr. Nguyen had finally admitted to taking the blood during his interrogation. He'd thought he could prove his point about blood color to the class and then return the blood to the hospital without anyone knowing. He didn't understand that once the blood left the controlled environment, it was contaminated and couldn't be used for transfusions anymore. Detective Barrett said Mr. Nguyen genuinely believed he wasn't hurting anyone and was shocked when he learned Samir Huang was the person who'd needed those exact blood units. The school made all the teachers go through mandatory reporting training the next week, and I saw them filing into the auditorium looking pretty uncomfortable about it. The trainer kept saying that concerning behavior had to be documented right away and couldn't just be ignored or treated like personality conflicts. During lunch, I overheard 2 teachers admitting they'd noticed Mr. Nguyen acting weird for months, but didn't know what they were supposed to do about it. One of them said she'd seen him crying in his car after school multiple times, but thought it was just the divorce making him sad. Another teacher said Mr. Nguyen had been talking about teaching real lessons in the teacher's lounge, and everyone just thought he meant being stricter with homework. The training made it clear that from now on, they had to report stuff like that to the principal immediately, instead of just hoping it would get better on its own. Leilani Cardenas from the local news published this big investigation about the whole thing 2 days later, and my mom showed it to me on her tablet at breakfast. The article said 3 other teachers had actually complained about Mr. Nguyen's behavior months before he brought the blood to class. They'd gone to the administration saying he was acting erratic and making weird comments, but the administration just wrote it off as personality conflicts between coworkers. One teacher had even documented finding Mr. Nguyen in the science lab at weird hours doing experiments that had nothing to do with the curriculum. The article had quotes from anonymous sources saying the school tried to handle everything quietly to avoid bad publicity. Principal Johnson called an assembly that Friday and announced she was taking early retirement at the end of the school year. She said it was a personal decision she'd been thinking about for a while, and that she wanted to spend more time with her grandkids. Nobody believed that for a second because we all knew she was forced out after trying to cover up what happened with the blood. Some parents in the back actually clapped when she made the announcement, which was pretty harsh, but showed how mad everyone still was. The district sent in these new trauma specialists to work with our class starting the next Monday, and they were way better than Caroline Perry had been. These specialists actually let us talk about what scared us, instead of just trying to make us forget about it. They had us do group activities where we could share our feelings, and they didn't rush us to move on like Caroline had. One of them told us it was normal to still feel upset weeks later, and that processing trauma takes time. They came 3 times a week for the rest of the semester, and Ryan even started coming back to the school for those sessions, because they actually helped. Meanwhile, the legal stuff with Mr. Nguyen kept moving forward, and Detective Barrett came to update us about what was happening. He told us Mr. Nguyen had decided to plead guilty to reduced charges instead of going to trial. The deal meant he'd do mandatory psychiatric treatment and give up his teaching license forever. He was going to serve 6 months in jail, and then 2 years of probation where he'd have to keep getting mental health treatment. Detective Barrett said our testimonies had been really important in making the case strong enough that Mr. Nguyen's lawyer advised him to take the deal. We also heard that Samir Huang had reached a settlement with the hospital for an undisclosed amount of money. My dad said undisclosed usually meant it was a lot, because hospitals don't want people knowing how much they pay out for security failures. The cool thing was that Samir donated part of his settlement money to create better security training programs for medical facilities. He wanted to make sure nobody else could just walk in and take blood like Mr. Nguyen had done. At lunch one day, Jane suggested we should do something positive to turn this whole mess into something good. After talking about it, we decided to organize a blood drive at the school to show that blood should be used to help people not stolen for weird classroom demonstrations. We got permission from the new principal and partnered with the Red Cross to set everything up in the gym. Our goal was to collect 100 units of blood, and we made posters and announcements to get people to sign up. The blood drive happened on a Saturday, and way more people showed up than we expected. Parents, teachers, and students from all grades came to donate, and by the end of the day, we'd collected 147 units of blood. The Red Cross people said it was one of the most successful high school drives they'd ever done. Samir Huang actually came to thank us personally and gave a little speech about how our response to the crisis gave him hope that good things could come from bad situations. He looked pretty healthy considering everything he'd been through, and people gave him a standing ovation when he finished talking. Mike told me later that week that his mom had gotten hired at a different hospital across town. This new place specifically wanted her because they valued employees who spoke up about safety concerns instead of punishing them for it. She became their patient safety advocate and used what happened at her old job to help create better protocols for blood storage and tracking. The hospital even asked her to speak at conferences about the importance of whistleblower protections in healthcare. Things kept changing at the school too, with the district implementing surprise safety audits where outside reviewers would show up randomly to check for hazardous materials or concerning situations. At first, the teachers complained about it being disruptive, but after a few audits found legitimate safety issues in other schools, they started seeing why it was necessary. One audit found expired chemicals in a chemistry storage room, and another found broken emergency equipment that nobody had reported. The audits actually helped catch stuff before anyone got hurt, which made everyone feel better about the whole new system they'd put in place. A few weeks later, during morning announcements, they called Megan's name over the speakers saying she needed to report to the main office, and we all looked at each other wondering what was going on since she never got in trouble. Turns out the district was giving her some big citizenship award for all the investigating she did during the blood bag mess, and how she helped uncover the truth about where it came from. She came back to class carrying this fancy certificate, and a letter saying they'd put $500 toward her college fund, which was pretty cool. At lunch, she told me she'd decided she wanted to be a journalist now, because she saw how important it was to dig into things and find out what really happened, instead of just accepting what people in charge told you. Her parents were super proud, and her mom even framed the certificate to hang in their living room. Around that same time, I heard from my mom, who ran into someone at the grocery store, that Mr. Nguyen's ex-wife and Samir were moving to Portland to get away from all the attention the whole thing had caused. Before they left, though, they made this big donation to the local mental health charity and put out a statement saying they hoped it would help other people going through crisis situations before things got as bad as they did with Mr. Nguyen. The new principal who'd replaced Johnson after she retired was this younger woman who actually listened to students, and one of the first things she did was set up this anonymous reporting system where anyone could flag concerns without worrying about getting in trouble. She put these locked boxes around the school where you could drop notes about anything that seemed wrong, and she'd check them every day herself. Within the first month, that system caught 3 different issues, including a teacher who was drinking during lunch breaks and a janitor who'd been taking pictures of students without permission. Our science class decided we wanted to do something positive with everything we'd learned, so we spent a whole month putting together this huge presentation about blood donation and safety that covered both the science part and the ethics of how blood should be handled. The health teachers loved it so much they made it part of the official curriculum, and now every freshman has to watch our presentation during their first semester. We even got the Red Cross to come review it, and they said it was one of the best educational tools they'd seen from high school students. Detective Barrett came to visit about 2 months after everything wrapped up, and principal gave him time to talk to our whole class during 6th period. He said we'd handled everything exactly right by documenting what we saw and cooperating with the investigation instead of trying to handle it ourselves or covering things up. He told us that because we'd kept such good records and been willing to speak up, it made the whole case way easier to resolve and helped make sure everyone got the help they needed, including Mr. Nguyen. The State Education Board ended up creating these new guidelines that required teachers to get approval before bringing any biological materials into classrooms for demonstrations. They called it the Nguyen Protocol, though they didn't use his full name in the official documents, just the initial N followed by protocol. Every science teacher in the state had to take a training course about it over the summer and sign forms saying they understood the rules. 6 months after everything happened, we found out through the grapevine that Mr. Nguyen was doing better in his treatment program and had written apology letters to everyone who was affected by what he did. Most of us didn't want to read them because we'd moved on, but Jane and a couple others said reading his apology helped them get closure on the whole thing. The hospital where the blood got stolen ended up becoming this model for security improvements, and Kathy Duran started speaking at medical conferences all over the country about preventing internal theft. She always mentioned in her talks how it was high school students speaking up that forced them to make the changes they should have made years ago. The hospital even created a whole new position just for tracking biological materials and making sure nothing could go missing without multiple people knowing about it right away. Tom surprised everyone by announcing he was going to become a lawyer focusing on education law, because seeing how the legal system protected us during the whole mess made him realize how important it was to have good advocates. His dad, who was already a lawyer, started mentoring him and helping him understand all the different ways lawyers could help protect students' rights and make sure schools stayed safe places to learn. Ryan had switched to online school after his panic attacks got bad, But by senior year, he'd worked with a really good therapist and felt ready to come back for his last year. He was different from before in a good way, and started this informal support group for other students dealing with trauma or anxiety, where they'd meet in the library during lunch once a week, just to talk and help each other out. The rest of junior year, our whole class stuck together in this weird way that surprised everyone, including us. We made a group chat called Blood Class that started as a joke, but turned into something real where people would post about tests they were stressed about or family stuff going on. When Mike's dad lost his job in February, we all chipped in money without him even asking, and left it in his locker with an unsigned note. Jessica had panic attacks in science class for months, and we'd all just quietly move our desks to give her space to leave if she needed to without making it a big deal. Tom started tutoring people in math because he said helping others made him feel less anxious about what happened. By senior year, we were known as the class that went through something together, and teachers treated us different, more careful, but also with more respect. At graduation, the new principal who replaced Johnson stood at the podium and called our whole class up for special recognition. She handed us certificates for courage and integrity, while our parents took pictures and most of us tried not to cry. The local newspaper wanted to do a story on the one-year anniversary, so Megan and I spent 3 weeks writing an article about how speaking up changed everything at our school. We interviewed other students and teachers who said the new safety protocols made them feel more protected, and the anonymous reporting system had already caught 2 other dangerous situations before they got bad. The blood drive we organized that first spring after the incident collected 147 units, and the next year's class wanted to beat our record, so they got 163 units. It became this huge competition where each grade tried to outdo the previous one, and the Red Cross started sending extra trucks because they knew our school would deliver. Detective Barrett emailed me during my first semester of college to say Mr. Nguyen had finished his treatment program and was working at a mental health center helping other people who'd had breakdowns. He said Mr. Nguyen would never teach again, but had found a way to help people and seemed genuinely better. Kathy Duran sent our class a letter saying the security system she designed after our incident was used in hospitals all over the country, and she'd named it after us, though she just used our graduation year, not our actual names. She said in 2 years it had prevented 43 thefts of medical supplies and probably saved lives because of what we'd been brave enough to report. Looking back from college, I can see how we all changed in different ways from what happened. Megan became a journalism major focused on investigative reporting, while Tom went to law school and Mike became an EMT. Jane started a nonprofit that trains students on how to report concerning behavior safely, and Ryan became a therapist specializing in trauma. The school itself changed too, with cameras in every classroom and clear rules about what teachers could bring in for demonstrations and monthly safety audits that actually meant something. They renovated Mr. Nguyen's old science classroom over the summer before my freshman year of college and turned it into this amazing lab with proper ventilation and safety equipment and locked storage for any materials. My mom sent me a picture of the small brass plaque they put by the door that just said, "Student Safety First," with our class year underneath. Nobody talks about the blood bag anymore, but everyone at that school knows something big happened that changed everything, and that one group of kids refused to stay quiet when adults wanted them to. That's it for today. Thanks for hanging out while I rambled about this stuff. Subscribe if you want more. I'll be here.